Okay, we're going to get started, everyone. Good evening. My name is Betsy Schimberg, and I, again, have the honor of serving as the interim director of the Howard Swears Center for Public Service at Brown University. And I also serve as an associate dean here at Brown. We are just delighted to be gathering together, even if it's virtually, to celebrate the opening of our accessibility entrance. This is a day that the Swears Center community has been hoping for nearly 3 decades, during all of our years at 25 George Street, and now finally made possible at 2 Stimson. I'd like to ask that before we start the program, we take a moment of silence in memory of Janet Swear, who passed away last week. Janet was the beloved spouse of Brown's 15th president, Howard Swear, for whom our center was named. Thank you. So as we sought to find a way to best celebrate our accessibility entrance when we cannot physically be together, we knew we wanted to honor the values of the Swear Center while continuing, as always, to build more just and equitable communities. And when we learned of the film Hearts of Glass, which I hope many of you have been able to watch over the last week, it seemed that sharing it with our many communities offered a pathway to celebration through the isolation of the pandemic. Let's watch a little bit of the promo video now.
So the phone rings. Pick it up. What do you say?
Hello, this is Bagel Harvest. How can I help you?
Yes!
This is a multi-million-dollar hydroponic greenhouse.
The goal here was to build something that was modern and really at a high level, technology-wise and yield-wise.
We have people with disabilities and people without working side by side, and everybody's being paid a competitive wage.
For Ty's ability in this nation, only about 12% are working. They're scared of things that you don't understand and you don't know. And to stop that, you have to have experience. You have to have that integration inclusion.
Nice. That was a really good break, Ty.
I think I loved the phrase a for-profit business with a nonprofit soul until we were a for-profit business with a nonprofit soul.
The tomatoes are looking a little bit sad at the moment.
So we just need to know what can we grow best in these carousels so that we can get good at something.
When you're getting fresh tomatoes in the dead of winter when it's negative 20 degrees, think about how cool that is.
We're probably about 2 to 2.5 months away from these guys fruiting.
All those of you who are red, point me at thee. Those of you who are green, I'm gonna wait till you're fully grown and come back for you.
This is 3 ingredients from Vertical Harvest: cheese, pistachios, and raspberries. Simplicity.
It shows the community what we can do if given the chance.
We have a lot of people watching. We have the town, state, the community, New York Times, we have CNN. They're all waiting to see, will this project work?
Thank you. So tonight I am so pleased to be here with a group of panelists, and I'm going to introduce them in a minute, but I first want to be sure to welcome all of our guests and to thank you for coming this evening. So I wanted to introduce the panelists now. We're going to talk about the film, accessibility, and justice. And I'm going to ask the panelists to wave when I introduce them so you know who they are. We're going to put the program in the chat so you can read their full bios. So we're going to start with Noy Allen, who's a junior undergraduate student at Brown, concentrating in biology. She is a Bonner Community Fellow, and she is a current site leader for the Partnership for Adult Learning, which partners Brown undergraduate students with people with intellectual or developmental disabilities. PAL is learner-centered and hopes to build mutually growing relationships through the shared pursuit of learning. I'm excited to introduce Hannah Bolin, who is a senior grower in the Microgreens department. Note her background screen. Hannah is a Texas native. Her passion for sustainability and her experience working with social enterprises brought her to Vertical Harvest. I'm super excited to have with us tonight Johnny Feifels, who is a senior farm associate at Vertical Harvest. Johnny graduated in 2015 from the University of Wyoming with a bachelor's degree in fine arts. He has been an employee at Vertical Harvest since it opened in the spring of 2016, and his professional skill sets at the greenhouse include seeding, harvesting, delivering produce, and guiding tours. I'd also like to introduce my colleague, Kelly Ramirez, who is the CEO of Social Enterprise Greenhouse, where she is a valued and key and much beloved Swear Center partner. Kelly teaches or has taught social entrepreneurship at RISD, Salve Regina, Providence College, and in the Brown University Leadership Institute. She was named a Woman to Watch by the Providence Business Week and was a Bow Fellow and is a mentor at Europe. And finally, we want to introduce Jennifer Tennican, who is the filmmaker and the director of Hearts of Glass. Jennifer began her documentary career in the late 1990s. Her award-winning work, including Hearts of Glass, The Stagecoach Bar, An American Crossroads, and Far Afield, A Conservation Love Story, has been featured in numerous film festivals and seen on PBS. Hearts of Glass is the centerpiece of an impact campaign that includes grassroots, virtual screenings, and partnerships with organizations dedicated to improving employment opportunities and outcomes for people with disabilities. So now that you've met us, this seems to me to be an important moment to acknowledge and say out loud that everyone on this panel is white. This is not intentional. We recognize that inclusivity comes in multiple forms. I would also like to acknowledge that those of us currently located in Providence are gathered on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded homelands of the Narragansett and Wampanoag people, and also recognize that Brown University has benefited from its complicated historical connection to slavery. These land and historical acknowledgements grow out of insights that flow from scholarship and from stories of truth shared by communities most impacted. The film we're here to discuss tonight is one such story of truth. A message of the film that resonated with me is that communities and people can do amazing things if given the chance. And to me, that's what this new entrance at the Swear Center provides. It provides a chance for everyone to enter our building and engage with community. And the whole thing, from the pavement on the path, to the button that opens the door, to the plantings in the yard, to the mulch around the planting, the whole of it, all of it, it's all possible because the Fiddler family stepped up to make it happen. And I want to take this opportunity tonight, and hopefully other opportunities in person, to thank them genuinely for their generosity and their leadership, and for their ongoing belief and support of the Swear Center in so many ways. Thank you, Josh and Janine. So let's get started. Let's have a conversation. So I have a question for everyone, and I think it's a good one to start with. Some of the most moving moments in the film were stories of failure and resilience. So I'd like to talk about the setbacks and the importance of the ability to regroup and change course. How does this play into social innovation or disability justice? And I think I'm going to pick on Kelly and see if she'd be willing to start us off.
Sure. Well, thank you so much, Betsy, and everyone at Brown for including me. And I just want to say that I was so moved by the Vertical Harvest story and the film. I watched it 2.5 times today, and I think I'm just getting started, and I think my family will get tired of hearing about it. So as I often say in the field of social entrepreneurship, failure is not the F word. It is part of the entrepreneurial journey, and, you know, incredibly important. I think an entrepreneur who has not met major challenges or failed along the way probably has not put themselves out there enough. And the true testament of a successful social entrepreneur in my mind is one that has met challenges, been able to pivot, adapt, is extremely coachable, and is, you know, embraces the opportunity to accept when things don't go as planned, and able to make the changes that are necessary. And I think there were so many amazing parts of the film and so many amazing parts of this story, but I think the fact that the team was really able to talk with their customers, talk with their employees, talk with all of their stakeholders, and listen and learn, and understand that no one gets it right the first time was one of the many, many inspirational parts of the film for me.
Jennifer, jump in.
I wondered, could I jump in? So I think one of the things with Vertical Harvest is because it's a public-private partnership, the moment that public funds are involved, there are some very unrealistic expectations and some very, very deep public scrutiny. So I think, you know, they spent a long time building a coalition of people, you know, behind the project. They spent a lot of time addressing people's concerns. One of their biggest detractors was actually the head of the Tea Party in Jackson. And he was absolutely focused on stopping the project, that no public funds would go to it. And they reached out to him. Nona and Penny, two of the co-founders, I believe had lunch with him every week for about 4 months and discussed, you know, the business plan and how they would be selling to high-end restaurants. And instead of, I mean, I think it was a real lesson in bringing your detractors kind of into the fold and taking it as an opportunity to really find out what the concerns were. Because often I think we know that some people say things that may not actually be the actual concern. So getting to know people enough where there's a level of trust and really finding out what the real story is. Yeah, so I just, the public funds, I think, are a big difference in some projects where it makes it a little bit trickier from the get-go.
Thanks, Jennifer. Hannah, I note that your mute is off. Do you want to jump in next?
Sure. I mean, I entirely agree with everything that Kelly mentioned. I think all of these challenges do build resilience. And I think that in a startup, it's kind of like the spark of magic in working for a startup, right? We're figuring this out together. We're building this together, and doing that with our employment model. Like, we made no assumptions about how to grow things, what we were gonna how we were gonna do things in the greenhouse. And I think every challenge we encountered kind of came with that sort of filter of, you know, we're testing every hypothesis, and we're not just assuming this is going to work, because we really have to figure out not just one, but two systems that are entirely new. And I think that is what has really driven our team as a startup. And I think just adding to the fact that we're fueled by purpose to build this just makes it that much easier for us to really motivate and drive things forward when we hit those challenges.
Thanks, Hannah. Johnny, would you like to add anything about the experience of failure and resilience?
I'm not sure.
Okay. We can.
I want to prompt Johnny. Do you remember we did a short video where you said you learned something from Batman Begins?
Yeah. Why fall? So we can learn to pick ourselves up.
Lovely.
I learned that from Batman Begins.
Lovely. Thank you for sharing that. That's perfect. So, Noy, do you want to build on that?
Yeah, I think in any new venture, there is going to be a certain level of unpredictability of like, what are you going to find when you actually do it? And that was definitely true in the film. And it's also true in every like Brown student when they join PAL on their first day of tutoring. You have no idea who you're going to meet. And I think a person's ability, and in this case, Vertical Harvest's ability to adapt to their constant changes and constant obstacles that come in their way is the real true measure of success. And it was really eye-opening to see it across the film, how the company employees as a whole adapted to basically every single challenge that could have happened.
There's that moment where they ask, we just need to grow something that will work, right? And your heart kind of sinks at the tomatoes on the ground. So it was so happy at the end when when the tomatoes actually worked, right? And like Johnny just said, you pick yourself back up. So we're celebrating not only the Swear Center's new entrance, but we're also celebrating the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act this year. And I'm wondering if our panelists can speak for a moment about how the situation for people with disabilities has changed over the last 30 years, thanks to advocates, particularly people with disabilities and their families, and the role of the ADA. Does anyone want to jump in and answer that question first?
Well, Betsy, I think you're absolutely right. It's, you know, through visibility is how change works. And the ADA movement was built on the shoulders of self-advocates and allies who put themselves out during protests and, you know, made themselves visible because, like it or not, you know, 30 years ago and beyond, people were cloistered away if they had disabilities, and it just was a different situation. And people have worked very hard to improve everything. But you know, I still, having worked on this project, I think I'm more aware of very limited portrayals of people with disabilities in the media. That oftentimes they just fall into a couple of stereotypes and often are perceived as sort of a monolithic population. And if working on this film has taught me one thing, it's that, you know, I mean, disability is part of a spectrum of being human, and everybody is different. So it's given me a bit more perspective on that. And I think, you know, from a perspective of being a media maker, the more that we can include advocates and self-advocates and family members and everybody else in the storytelling process and allow people to speak with their own voices, however that might be, it might, you know, and through accessibility and adaptive technology, it's really beneficial to everyone.
Yeah, I just want to say, I think that the fact that this story has been shared with the public is really important in just raising awareness and bringing issues to the forefront. And I think that more and more of that is happening. And yesterday I asked my colleague to pull a list of all of the social enterprises that we've worked with over the past 10 years that have impacted people with disabilities. And I, you know, I know the short list that we work with very closely, but there were over 50. And many of them are employment models, which I think is really, really exciting that is recognized as what is, you know, it's such a perfect model when it works. And we saw that in Vertical Harvest. And I was just really blown away by seeing this list. And we are seeing more and more also mainstream businesses that are coming to us wanting to learn about ways that they can have more positive social impact in communities. And I think a workforce development model is one of the most effective ways. And what I love about what was portrayed in the film is it really shows the value of having a diverse workforce and bringing multiple perspectives to the forefront. And we're all always learning from each other. And I just think that that was such a very special part of this business and what was portrayed in the film.
Hannah, can I call on you to jump in next?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, yeah, I mean, we've talked about the ADA a lot in our workplace, haven't we, Johnny? And I think I kind of echo Jen's sentiment about sort of this visibility for this workforce. And I think the ADA just barely scratched the surface, as you know, Kelly was alluding to, with now all of these employment models and what we're working towards in Vertical Harvest. But I think that working with people with different abilities has brought just so much more to our business and to our community. I work harder because Ty Warner and Johnny's work ethic is unparalleled. And I now want to advocate that for them in our community too, because I know what incredible people they are, what incredible employees they are, and how much they do for their community. I mean, Johnny is a huge advocate here. He's always around town. And I think a lot of our employees kind of share this same sentiment that was started by a lot of the people driving the movement for the ADA, just this passion for advocacy that you don't find with necessarily other groups in our community. And they're not just advocating for themselves, they're advocating for others and for sustainability and for all sorts of things, because I think that they can really sympathize with exclusion and sort of some of the wrongs in our community. And I don't know if you want to speak on that at all, Johnny Feifels.
Yeah. Where do I begin?
Do you feel like you're a strong advocate in our community, Johnny?
Yeah.
Why do you think
so? Sorry, wait.
How do you think you are an advocate in our community?
Oh, I look at rainbow flag, look at pride flags on the internet, and I post them on deviantart.com.
I love it.
And I even draw them.
Thanks.
Yeah, the other thing that Johnny, where you see Johnny in the film, that really spoke to me, because I was not aware of the term ableism before I started working on the film, and Johnny already knew the definition of it. And there's that scene in there before Micah presents at the weekly boost, and you know, as important as it is for us to sort of acknowledge that this panel is white people, you know, I mean, it's also what we're looking for in what the disability community, I think, is looking for is full participation in society. And it's a civil rights issue, and that's really the bottom line.
Right, right. Noy, I'd love to hear your perspective on this.
Yeah, so I think agreeing with everything that's been said, I think the film also showed why it's important and the benefits of integration and inclusion beyond the public school system, which I think has been a huge area of improvement, but a definitely area that could improve more in the future. And that's also what PAL focuses on. We try to bring adults more integrated into the community, and you can really see the benefit, just as Hannah was saying before. It really reads in the film, and I think having a film like this that shows how important it is to continue the integration, inclusion, and participation throughout one's life and not stop at like 18 or 22 years old. I think it's really beneficial to start spreading that message.
Thank you. Thank you. So Jen, I have a question specifically for you. One of the first things I noticed is that you, the filmmaker, made specific choices about the film, most noticeably having the audio description explaining the action. And I think this demonstrates the ways that people with disabilities may experience the world differently, and how we all can make choices about making the world around us more accessible. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about conversations you may have had about accessibility when you were making the film. How did you walk the talk, right, to make the film accessible?
Right. So we worked with a lot of advisors in the disability community. We also did a number of test screenings throughout the process of moving from a rough cut of the film to a fine cut. And one of the things that I think we realized pretty early on was that it really needed to be accessible and more people are familiar with captioning or closed captioning or open captioning, where the captions are up all the time, than they are with audio description for blind and low vision viewers. But it's yet another accessibility tool that exists. And we were lucky to find a funder who's also a voice artist and a philanthropist, and who underwrote, we actually did our first audio description, and it wasn't that good because I create very talky films. And to have good audio description, you actually need areas where there is no talk to do it. But if you have a creative and really good audio description artist and people who are working with you, she ended up making our audio description so much better. It was really a terrific experience. So when we went to public television, the audio description was available. And hopefully many more people could enjoy the film, watch the film, experience the film because of that. So, you know, we really appreciate it. Not everyone takes us up on our offer, and perhaps I should be more rigid about that we don't want to show the film unless it has the audio description included. That's a little self-reflective part for me later, but it's just nice to make people aware that exists. And, you know, people with disability, you know, being a person with a disability can happen at any point in people's lives. And largest minority group in the world. So, you know, even circling back to Kelly and economic choices around this, you know, as consumers, they carry a lot of weight. And also, you know, in businesses, you know, I mean, people are making more decisions about who they're going to buy from. I've totally taken this in a different direction after the whole audio description thing, but I just think, you know, the argument for employing people with disabilities can't be it's the right thing to do, or it's the nice thing to do, or it's the, you know, it makes business sense. And I think that's what business leaders will pay attention to.
Thank you. Thank you. Hannah, question for you. You've worked your way up the chain of Vertical Harvest, working with Microgreens and now managing the department. As we saw in the film, that's a successful product at Vertical Harvest, definitely. So many of our students are interested in the ways in which business can positively impact the community. I'm wondering how you see Vertical Harvest as a successful example of sustainability and social enterprise.
Absolutely. I think my background was in social enterprise, and I didn't plan on being a farmer originally, but it sort of happened by chance, and I'm really glad that it did. I think that, as to what Jen was just saying, the key with having a successful example of a social enterprise is not having something that just feels nice. It's real good. And so really being intentional about not having impact be some sort of sideshow tacked on to your business model, but really making sure that it's integrated and core to what you're trying to achieve. And so I think in this specific example with our company, Vertical Harvest, you see Nona in the film talking about folding these layers of innovation onto each other. And then that's really what's making it happen. You know, our two main missions here, meaningful employment and sustainable food, couldn't work without one another. Our dedicated employees sort of drive the success of our business, and our local food production makes that employment meaningful. And so really thinking about putting this impact in the core of your business, I think, is a huge part for social enterprise. And I think that the other sort of successful thing that you see us running into tensions with, as we were talking about way earlier, the for-profit business with a nonprofit soul. I think that's sort of the part of the argument for having this for-profit stance, is that we are really pushed to drive our tempo and to create our own revenue stream, which in the end could be way more sustainable than having to create a donor list that we have to solicit and engage and spend 30% of our income on. We can create our own revenue stream. And I think that's, again, it circles back to what makes the employment actually meaningful, right? Like, we're not getting donations to to employ people. People are doing incredible work, and that's why they're employed, and that's what makes it meaningful.
Thank you. Thanks, Hannah. So, Johnny, you shared with us a little bit about advocacy, but I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about what type of advocacy work is most important to you.
Well, there's gay rights, for example. They've been discriminated against since the beginning of time.
Johnny, do you want to share? Have you, I think, weren't you involved in participating in some protests on the town square, or?
Oh, yes. I went to a protest in Black Lives Matter in June 9th this year.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for that work, and thank you for sharing that. I had another question for you, if that's okay.
Yeah, keep going.
Okay. So in the film, we learned that you get a promotion with a pretty cool title. And so now I want to know, do you still have the same position?
Yes, I do.
With the same title?
Yeah, it's 20% cooler.
That was such a great line. I loved that part of the film.
That is my favorite line in the whole film.
Thank you. Actually, it's a TV show.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
So thank you. Thank you. We're going to turn to Noy for a minute. Noy, you've worked for years with PAL to center learners' needs. And I'm wondering, as you watch the film, how do you think it reflected on your work with people with intellectual and developmental disabilities? And what have you learned about how employers could work better with people with intellectual and developmental disabilities?
Yeah. So I think one of the really big things that both PAL tries to do and I saw Vertical Harvest also trying to do is really emphasize the relationship between the employees, and for us it's between our learners and our tutors. And yes, we're a tutoring program, but we really focus on growing that bond between our entire PAL family, but specifically between our learner and tutor pairs. And I think our emphasis on this integration and connection and learners more as an active member of their community was really reflected in Vertical Harvest's mission and throughout the film. And it's because we give our learners a chance, like, for example, me and my learner for the pre-COVID, but we've been together for 5 semesters at this point, and we're going to be together for all my 4 years at Brown. And we used to bake together, and like I never knew how to bake, he didn't know how to bake, and like, yeah, it took us an hour and a half to make something that someone else would take. It's like we still did it, and we're learning, and now pre-COVID era, we are a lot better than where we first started. So it took us a while to get there, but we still got there. And I think that giving people a chance to get there on their own terms through their own learning styles and using their own strengths, PAL really focuses on, Vertical Harvest focuses on, and I think future employers can also focus on as well if they want to start bringing in more and working with people with intellectual and developmental disabilities for sure. And I also think just the mutual learning, like it goes 2 ways. Like my learner, we call them learner and tutors, but really I think I've learned more from him than I've taught him, if we're being honest. And I think that mutual beneficial relationship and learning is also really reflected between the employees in Vertical Harvest. And I think emphasizing that might also be advantageous if the mission is to try to convince other employers to incorporate this working model.
Thank you, Noy. I appreciate that mention of reciprocity, which is, one of the central philosophies of the Swire Center. So thank you for that. I want to spend some time now talking about social innovation. In the film, the folks at Vertical Harvest use the tagline, we've talked about it tonight, a for-profit business with a nonprofit soul. So Kelly, I am wondering, is this a model that can be replicated? And I'm also wondering what you made of the film, knowing of the most recent winner of Social Enterprises Greenhouse's innovation competition, which is Man Up, a startup indoor hydroponic vegetable business to provide training and employment opportunities for men of color in Rhode Island. So I had to give them a little plug, but yeah, please talk to us.
Yes, thank you. And I very happily shared the information about this film with Rhonda Price, who's the founder of Man Up. And she emailed me back like, that's amazing. I might have to rethink some of, my model and what I'm thinking about, because she is using sort of a freight truck hydroponic garden model that she's planning to use. But again, it is a workforce development model, an employment model. And yeah, I mean, I absolutely believe in the mission first business. And I loved what Hannah said with regards to the last question, and thinking really about, the mission money tension, and the fact that increasingly these types of models, they are the right thing to do, but that is not the selling point. The selling point is it is the smart thing to do now. I think increasingly people want to have purpose in their lives, and young people want to have careers where they have purpose. And so if businesses want to attract the talent that they need to be successful, they have to think about the impact that they're having on community. And so I just believe that, I about 5 years ago heard, one of the leading thinkers in the social enterprise space say, I bet in 10 years, we're not going to be talking about social enterprise, because all enterprise will be social. And this is the way that all business will be operating. And I still believe that that is true. And there were so many lines that I loved from the film, but I loved when Nona said, I'm glad we didn't say, okay, we have to make the farm work first. Because by putting these things together, the workforce and the farm, that's when we're able to really learn about the potential of both. And I think that is what it's all about. This is how we can actually maximize the impact that business has, the double bottom line or the triple bottom line, depending on how you think about it. So I am just so happy, that there is another amazing story in the public media where people can watch and learn, because I do think one of the biggest barriers remains just, education and understanding of these types of business models. Because when people hear about it, when people watch this film, it's inspirational. And I think it gets people's wheels turning in terms of what is truly possible.
Thank you. So I'm now going to open it up to questions that our participants might have. Feel free to put a question in the chat or in the Q&A. We have one now, actually from one of our interpreters, who asks, one of the greatest challenges for many deaf and hard of hearing people is linguistic and cultural barriers. ASL interpreters cost money, and businesses see them as a liability rather than a value. So entrepreneurial opportunities to create their own businesses would be great. How hard is it to get the startup capital?
I can take a crack at that. Yeah, getting funding is a challenge, whether it's philanthropic funding or investment capital. But it happens all the time. And I'm so glad that this question was asked, because we certainly have a lot of community-based partnerships. And I think that there are opportunities for people that may have disabilities of some sort to consider self-employment and entrepreneurship as a pathway. And I think, we have some great examples of that. So I think thinking about entrepreneurship as a possibility is always something that I hope remains front of mind for all individuals, including people who have barriers of any sort. I mean, that's what social entrepreneurship is all about, is breaking down barriers. So.
Jennifer, could you speak to about startup capital in terms of making a film? At the Swear Center, we use storytelling as one of our modes of social change, right? When we think about the different types of social justice, storytelling is one of those. So I was wondering if you could talk a bit about what it takes to tell your story more broadly.
So I have always partnered with nonprofits in order to do independent documentary work, and I've focused on nonprofits that fit thematically with what I was doing. So the film that the documentary that I did on the local watering hole, we partnered with the Jackson Hole Historic Society around that, and there are just all these community benefits that you can kind of roll in. So we collected a tremendous amount of archival material that we then archived and gave to the Historical Society, so they could then, you know, keep it for future generations. So in this film, we actually worked with our local slow food chapter, Slow Food in the Tetons, that recognized the value of storytelling and that all ships rise with the tide around stories about local food production. You know, I'd like to say that everybody was welcome. Welcome Vertical Harvest with open arms. And this is a little bit of a tangent, but but you know, I mean, I think that there is a very human response to businesses sometimes, like, I do that, you can't do that. So I think Vertical Harvest went out of its way to be extremely welcoming to local food producers and also respectful of the markets that they already had. So they actually decided that they would not sell at the local summer farmers market so that they wouldn't be competing, because I think some people felt they had an unfair advantage with public funds and the visibility they were getting. But in the end, you know, once you kind of prove yourself, it kind of just melts away, in the same way that the hippies and the cowboys, when they started dancing together at the bar and then started dating and having babies, like that, that also brings people together. So, so yes, funding. I'm sorry, I'm not proving myself to be able to stay on a straight line here. I actually am I am a very good linear storyteller, but anyway. You know, we try to do, I have a very small team. We try to do these things very economically. This is the first film that I've worked on where we really had an impact and engagement campaign. This kind of work is relatively new, maybe over the last 10, 15 years. I mean, it basically started with Al Gore's film, which everyone knows the name to, and just as An Inconvenient Truth. Right. So, you know, they went from sort of a PowerPoint on steroids to all sorts of impact related films. So, you know, our major challenge is finding the aligned organizations and how we can have the most impact, because it's exciting. We're seeing how this film is resonating with a very diverse group of viewers, and it's an opportunity to get people out of their silos, to address the next generation of people who are working in various fields, from business to social work to hydroponics and sustainable food production.
Thank you. Thank you. So we have a bunch of questions coming in now in the Q&A. Johnny, there's a question specifically to you and to Hannah. Someone is wondering, how did the first tomato taste?
Actually, I'm not really fond of tomatoes.
Did you taste the first one, Johnny?
No.
Yeah, I wasn't there for the first tomato, but the first tomato I did have was delicious. I think, Johnny, do you eat any of the cherry tomatoes that we grow?
No.
Not a tomato guy. What's your favorite microgreen though?
I like sunflowers and daikon radish I'm broccoli.
There you go. He's a greens guy.
Excellent. Thank you for that. There's it's a mouth-watering scene, right? To taste that first tomato with a little bit of salt. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
We have another question about addressing the issues of social justice and intersectionality. For people who are Black, how do you support individuals and provide resources to reduce those compounding disparities of racism and ableism? That's a tough question. Somebody want to take that one on, maybe? Supporting individuals and providing resources to reduce compounding disparities of racism and ableism.
I don't think I know the full answer, but I know that as a workplace dedicated to inclusion, we're always focused on this, even with, I mean, it's not as if we say, you know, okay, we have this workforce with people with different abilities and they don't need to learn about inclusion because they are the inclusion. You know, our entire staff is sort of taking training on diversity, equity, and inclusion and continuing to have these discussions outside of just our own current model. I think that to say like, okay, we did it, we solved it, it would be would not be obviously realistic or acknowledge all of the complexity that inclusion presents us with. And I think that just as an organization, we're still striving to educate ourselves on how we can do that even better in our community and in other communities as we look to replicate elsewhere with, you know, our community is not necessarily the most racially diverse. We have some, but other communities that we're moving into, that's a much bigger inequity that they're facing. And so we're definitely conscious of that as well as we try and replicate in other communities.
And I think also back to a storytelling perspective, I think representation is important. And so, you know, highlighting the voices of those people who are unfortunately suffering those double or triple inequities. You know, again, for me, the easiest way to get something across is to bring someone into a personal story and not set off with the highfalutin goal of I'm going to educate you about this. So representation is really important.
Thank you. Thank you both. I'm going to keep going because we have some other questions here. So somebody's asked, in the film, why did you choose to center the voices of the guardians of the employees with disabilities as opposed to their own voices? Somebody's interpretation. Yes, Jen.
Yeah, so I think there's definitely some cases where that is what we did. We also tried to have everybody's voice, I think, in a way, but we tried to do more formal sit-down interviews with various employees, and it's stressful no matter if you're a person with a disability or not, and they don't always work out the way you thought. So I think what we decided to do was to do more storytelling where we tried to be a fly on the wall and let the story unfold. So we didn't completely leave behind some sit-down interviews because we felt it provided context. We did have consultants on board from, people with disabilities, people in academia, from university centers on excellence in developmental disability. And we tried to have a diverse cast of characters who were featured. And some are parents because to me, parents had a role in the story. All that being said, now that I know more than I did 4 years ago about maybe how to accessibility and different ways to interview people and have and represent people's voices, I might choose to tell a very different story now. So that's my answer.
Interesting. Thank you. Thank you for that reflection. Somebody actually wrote in the Q&A, thank you, Jennifer, for your keen advocacy. The disability community is the largest quote unquote minority in the country, and they are rarely at the discussion table as voices or sources of knowledge. So shout out to you for that. Kelly, we have a question for you. When can we get a project like this going in Rhode Island?
Yeah, and I was actually going to say, Hannah, I would love to hear more about the scale strategy of vertical harvest. I think I read or heard that Philadelphia is the next location or somewhere, but yes, I love the model, and I'm all about bringing successful models to Rhode Island. So.
Yeah, absolutely. We have plans to replicate vertical harvest in other communities, as I mentioned. We have announced in Portland, Maine, our next location, a much larger facility there, and we're very excited to work with that community. I think the way that we've approached sort of replication, it sort of goes back to an idea we talked about very early on in the panel about not making assumptions about what's going to work. So we've had communities come to us rather than go to them and say, you need this. So they've come to us and said, we really think that this will bring value to our community, and said, great, let's figure out if we can make that happen. So Maine is the first one. We also received a feasibility grant from the Fannie Mae Foundation to look at the potential of combining vertical harvest with affordable housing in Chicago. And as we're looking to replicate in the next few years, Rhode Island is actually on the short list. So you might be in luck. We'll see how it all turns out.
That is a great summary to sort of end on. So thank you, Hannah. We're almost out of time. So I'm going to wrap this up. I want to share that one of the most poignant lines of the film for me was when a staff member was talking about Kyle, I believe, and said, I got to know him and he blew my mind. To me, that was a reminder that we don't fear people whom we know. And at this moment of deep polarity in our country, I took a lesson from the film beyond that of food sustainability or disability justice or social innovation. So I encourage you to leave this conversation and think about somebody whom maybe you're not sure about, and reach out to get to know them, because they just might blow your mind. So thank you to everybody for being here to celebrate with us. Thank you to Kelly and Johnny and Hannah and Noy and Jennifer for being on the panel. Thank you to our ASL interpreters. Thank you so much to the Fiddler family. And finally, I want to say thank you to two people who made this happen and wrote all these thank yous and didn't include themselves, and that's Teresa Lewis and Kate Porter. Thank you for all of your hard work. So to all of you out there, our gratitude goes to you for the many ways that you support and nourish the Swear Center community and our Rhode Island community. And we look forward and remain optimistic that we will be able to gather together in person very soon. Take care, everyone. Good night.